Welcome to Healthcare du Jour, where we dish up and digest the latest in healthcare. For the next 30 minutes, sit back as we bring you insight, commentary, and discussion on trending topics to the table, all expertly served up by our host and his guests. Now here's your host, Matt Fisher.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining as we dive into the hottest topics in healthcare. I'm your host, Matt Fisher. On the menu today is Jason Bellet, co-founder and chief business officer at Eko Health. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Nice to connect with you.
Yeah, so Jason, what I always like to do at the beginning of the show is give my guests a chance to provide more of an introduction in terms of who they are and what they do. So Jason, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Jason Bellet, one of the co-founders at Eko and our chief business officer. Had the privilege of co-founding the company about 12 years ago and have been building it ever since. Excited to tell you a little bit more about it today.
Yeah, that's great. And before we kind of get into that, I'm always interested to know what got you into healthcare in the first place.
My co-founders and I have a really interesting founding story in that we actually started the company as seniors at UC Berkeley. We were undergraduates, and my co-founder, Connor, who is our CEO and a biomedical engineer, was taking a senior thesis course. And in the class, he had this light bulb moment really around helping healthcare providers identify heart disease more actively on the front lines of care. And so he started what started off as a class project to build a smart stethoscope, a Shazam for heart sounds, and then brought in myself, who was in the business school, and our third co-founder, who was a mechanical engineer, to really help him build out a prototype. And little did we know at the time that this class project and prototype would turn into 10 years of company building and 500,000 devices now shipped. But it's been the journey of a lifetime, and I think we all didn't know where it was going to go. And now we're a decade into our healthcare journey.
That is a pretty interesting kind of origin story. So it's, I think as you were just saying, your focus was on, building a medical device. So maybe can you walk us through what does that process actually look like? Because I don't know, I certainly haven't had a chance to really talk to anybody about the process of developing and getting a medical device to market.
Yeah, absolutely. At Eko, kind of at our heart, we think of ourselves as a data science company insofar as we are helping clinicians make better decisions using AI. But to actually capture the sound to make those decisions, we had to build the first smartphone connected digital stethoscope, which is a class 2 regulated medical device. And to build regulated medical products, even when they're on the lower risk side, like a stethoscope, it's really capital intensive. And so we raised a seed round pretty early on, started off with some 3D prototyping and did some user research with physicians at UCSF and Stanford and got their feedback on the hardware and the usability of it. But then ultimately began actually building out the working prototypes with some hardware engineers and building out our own engineering team. And it took us about 2 years to get our first version of our product to market. And of course, like any new piece of hardware, it was twice the size as what it is today because we've been able to make the chips smaller, the form factor smaller, and more usable. And so it's very fun to put our very first Eko Core digital stethoscope side by side to our Core 500 digital stethoscope, which we have today, which has so much more built into it, from sound amplification to noise reduction. And then, of course, we started off building for the iPhone 4, if you can believe it. And so just to see the smartphone connected stethoscope and the technology at our disposal to make it smart come so far over the last decade has been really interesting.
Yeah, so what were kind of some of the challenges of tackling, device innovation, on a type of device where you're talking about a stethoscope? Is something that I feel like everyone has in their mind when they think of a doctor because it's been around for such a long period of time.
Well, the stethoscope is such a ubiquitous tool. And so when designing a digital stethoscope, we really wanted to pay tribute to the form factor and usability of the analog stethoscope, but make sure that we could layer on some of those digital components. And so it looks very similar to the stethoscope that all of us can draw on as sort of the icon of medicine. But embedded in it is a microphone and a chip, a speaker that amplifies sound, and then obviously the Bluetooth capability to connect it to where a lot of our innovation really lies, which is on the smartphone application, right? So once you digitize the heart and lung sounds, what can you do with them to help provide insight to the provider? So save them, share them, and then ultimately analyze them. And what's interesting, Matt, is that the analysis algorithms, the AI that we've built around the heart sounds and ECG, are also medical devices. They are SAMDs. And so we've had to pursue and ultimately achieve FDA clearance for each algorithm that we've built to analyze data with our devices. But to go back to your question, first and foremost, it was around making sure that we built a product that could just fit right into the physician workflow. And so connects to the phone that's in their pocket. They wear it around their neck and use it 25 times a day. And we wanted to make sure it was accessible to any provider that uses a stethoscope today.
Yeah, and I think that was a great point that you just raised is, building to fit into that workflow. Because so often it feels like newer technologies aren't considering that perspective and are just trying to impose and kind of dictate how the utilization needs to go.
I mean, you could have the best algorithm in the world, but if it can't be deployed at the bedside, it's going to sit on a shelf. Or similarly, you could have the best device in the world, but if you haven't figured out how it can be used on a patient in a way that is intuitive to both the physician and also the pay and economic structure of a visit, it's also going to sit on a shelf. And so we're constantly learning ourselves, but I think what was really beneficial to the adoption of our technology was that we were already integrated from a stethoscope perspective into every single physical exam. The providers are used to wearing it, used to picking it up, putting it on the patient's chest. And in the same way, Nest changed the thermostat or Ring changed the doorbell, but at the end of the day, it's still a thermostat and it's still a doorbell. We brought the stethoscope into the digital age, but first and foremost, it's just an amazing stethoscope. Best sound quality, easy to use, comfortable in the ear. And then from there, you earn the right to layer on some additional features and insights.
Yeah, and kind of thinking about that layering on, I think you also, had said that it's really the smartphone application and the software within those applications that are where you're able to drive a lot of the innovation. So, so from your perspective, what are those areas of innovation, and kind of how did that change the game?
Yeah, great question. So the areas of innovation, I would say, really do span between the hardware that we've developed. Insofar there is no other stethoscope like it or has been like it, in that we have active noise canceling. We have the ability to visualize an ECG right on the stethoscope itself. We have amplification, which has been incredibly beneficial to hard of hearing providers. And then combined with the active noise cancellation, they can really kind of hone into sounds they weren't able to hear before, along with multiple filters for heart and lung. But the then ability to visualize the data the provider's listening to on the phone, we've created some really proprietary ways of showing heart sounds and ECG, of live streaming them. So during COVID, we saw a huge spike in the need to send a real-time audio stream of a heart sound and lung sound when the patient and provider were not in the same space. So a patient could be in an isolation room and a provider could be standing outside and actually listen to the real-time feed of the patient's heart sound. That really hadn't been done at scale before. And then ultimately, the most of the IP is in our AI, where you have the ability to take a 15-second heart sound and analyze it for the presence of a structural heart murmur, low ejection fraction with an algorithm we recently got FDA cleared, which can help identify heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Very close partnership with Mayo Clinic that helped us bring that to life. And then we have an entire pipeline of algorithms that go out about 5 years that we are continuing to develop and build, and ultimately we'll put through FDA clearance in order to make the platform, even more beneficial in those 15 seconds you have with the patient.
Yeah, so kind of thinking about that FDA clearance component of it, you mentioned it's software as a medical device, which is an area that seems to have continues to undergo refinement and changing understanding of what the FDA actually itself wants to do with it. So kind of what's your experience been as you've gone through that process, probably over the lifespan of it kind of existing within the FDA?
We were definitely one of the first, among the first cohort of companies to work with the FDA to have an AI algorithm approved as an SAMD. And it's been actually wonderful to be able to kind of be on the cutting edge of it. We knew that we had to build these algorithms to be able to be FDA cleared. And so the vastness of our training data set, the holdout validation data sets that we had to set aside in order to build our validation reports to submit to the FDA, the caliber of the clinical partners that we engaged with, from MassGen to Mayo, to Northwestern, were really sort of built in and knowing that we had to hit a very high level of rigor in order to get these algorithms to market. And ultimately, we were able to demonstrate to the FDA that the sensitivity and specificity to pick up these conditions was worth deploying to the bedside and including in our suite.
Yeah, and kind of so it sounds like that really informed, as you said, who you were working with and the strategy of, how you go about developing the data. So it's, kind of as you went through that process, were there unexpected developments or unexpected lessons that you learned that resulted in any pivots of how you went through the development process?
What was unique about our algorithms was that the data set that we had to train this AI on didn't exist before Eko. If you wanted to go out today and build AI for ultrasound or AI for 12-lead EKG, you could work with a health system and potentially license that data, of course, de-identified, but then have a team of data scientists really dive into training algorithms based off of that health system's pre-existing data sets, right? Or a consortium of health systems. When Eko went out to say, okay, we want to build AI for heart sound, using heart sounds to help primary care providers identify structural heart disease or heart failure, there wasn't millions or tens of millions of pre-recorded heart sounds that our data scientists could just begin to dig into, or that we could go out and license. And so we had to actually build that data set ourselves. And knowing that we ultimately were going to need to use that data set to train algorithms, it was really, really important that that data set was gold standard. And so we worked with tier 1 academic medical centers to collect heart sounds that were then echocardiogram validated. They became sort of the gold standard labeled data set that our data science team was able to then turn into this AI. So I think the humbling part of that entire experience was the time it takes to actually go out and do that research, collect that de-identified data, train the algorithms is really a function of years. And it's one of the reasons why, we started the company in around 2014, and we came out with our first device in about 2016, but our first algorithms didn't really ship until about 2020. And there was really that 4-year ramp up of building and training the AI, and then of course validating it and putting it through FDA clearance before the vision of a smart stethoscope could really even come together. We had the stethoscope, and then we had to make it smart.
Yeah, and kind of as you were going through and creating that gold standard data set, as you were describing, one of the touch points that seems like that keeps coming up around data sets and AI development is health equity and potential for health bias. So kind of what was your experience on that front?
Yeah, the FDA has some pretty clear guidelines around the diverse makeup of both the training and the validation data sets. And so not only did we follow those guidelines, we made it a priority to ensure that we collected data across a diverse population of patients and worked with academic partners that could ensure that we would get a diverse set of patients enrolled as part of our data collection efforts. But I would say that the FDA is on the forefront at this point in really making sure that SAMDs are taking into account diverse populations.
Yeah, no, that's actually very positive to hear. I suspect that's probably a nuanced point that is hard to capture when you're just dealing with headlines. And for those of you just joining, I'm talking with Jason Bellet from Eko Health, and we've been talking about the development of a smart stethoscope and creation of analytics and AI tools around it. So, kind of, Jason, picking up more on that AI side of it, I think as you were just pointing out, you've been in that development phase for a significant amount of time from AI. So how have you seen, like the hype that has grown up around AI kind of complicate your ability to get understanding and appreciation for the tool that you've developed? And, is that kind of driving, false expectations of what it can or should do?
It's a really great question. And I think AI means a lot of different things to different people. And so we try to get really specific around what type of AI we're actually building. And, for the audience, Eko builds decision support algorithms that helps healthcare professionals identify signs of heart disease using a stethoscope in the primary care exam, primarily as our end user base. And so the specific algorithms that we've developed and now have FDA cleared are a structural heart murmur detection algorithm, an AFib detection algorithm, and a low ejection fraction detection algorithm, all of which ingest ECG and sound, and in about 15 seconds of processing data, provide the clinician an interpretation, and essentially will say structural heart murmur detected, low EF detected, or AFib detected. And then the next step is for the primary care physician or the clinician to refer that patient to a confirmatory echocardiogram and a specialist visit. The problem that we're solving is that so many murmurs and low ejection fraction detection patients walk in and out of their primary care visit undetected and then show up in the ER 6 months later. But to go back to your point, Matt, I think we have to get very specific when you're a startup building AI, what you're actually doing. Otherwise, it just becomes a buzzword. And for Eko, it's really that early detection for heart disease versus saying we're building diagnostic AI or we're building care pathway AI or even communication AI or scribing AI. There's just so much that can be built right now. And not every AI is considered software as a medical device. So not only are we building AI, but we're building FDA regulated AI. And so it's a very different kind of caliber.
Yeah, and those are a lot of great distinctions because, as you said, it's my suspicion is a lot of the technology companies that are breaking into healthcare are very consciously trying to stay outside of that software as a medical device bucket. Because it's I think it should be clear from how you're describing it. It's a very long, involved process where there is a lot of valid reasons to want to ensure that the tool that's being created is safe and is not going to cause the risk of harm. Whereas some of those other examples you're giving are not direct patient care or things where the stakes are a little bit lower, and arguably maybe it's just kind of getting thrown out there from the buzzword perspective because it is the hottest topic at the moment, whether you're talking healthcare or any other industry, and it's almost a way to garner attention without necessarily thinking through what is this tool actually doing, and is it doing what we're trying to say that it does?
Yeah, and I think I very well said. And I think within the startup ecosystem, build the ability to develop an AI algorithm isn't really differentiated. I think companies used to be able to sort of differentiate themselves on that just basic ability. We can build algorithms, but the fact is that is in some sense getting democratized now, right? And I mean, let's even look at the accessibility of OpenAI to help bolt on different sort of applications on top of it, and then all of a sudden have AI as part of your solution. Where Eko really sort of sets ourselves apart is the proprietary data. And the fact that in order to use the AI, you need the heart sound. In order to get the heart sound, you need the stethoscope. And the user base of 500,000 users using the stethoscope means that we can actually build these next generation algorithms a lot faster than it took us to even build the first couple, right? It's like the install base now allows us to iterate faster and improve the product at a faster clip than we were able to do certainly 10 years ago, even 3 years ago. And so I think understanding the data source of where the AI is getting developed is really, really important when looking at sort of the defensibility of the technology, and ultimately, is this sort of AI going to be commoditized, or is it going to be something that can sort of scale?
Yeah, and it also, kind of that closed loop certainly makes sense. And I think that also goes back to the point that they were making of have a specific use case in mind and have a specific, benefit that you're trying to produce. And that's going to allow you to refine and focus in on the data that you're collecting and then how you interact with it, as opposed to trying to boil the ocean.
Right. Yeah, I think the specific application of using heart sounds and ECG to help identify disease earlier, it feels like such a narrow, potentially even niche market. And it would blow your mind how many algorithms we could potentially build with that specific data stream. And so we often, have this conversation of like, how wide do we want to go? How deep do we want to go? And our vision is very much that in the next, decade, every clinician will have a smart stethoscope, and that stethoscope will be able to help them identify a handful of conditions. And to actually make that vision a reality, we have to stay laser focused on it.
Yeah. And I think, as I said, that certainly makes sense because it's, if you start kind of letting attention slip or the details slip, then that's going to get noticed. And kind of building off of the, hopefully to building off of that point you're making about, that ability to assist with diagnosis and, grow utilization. I think earlier, kind of earlier in the conversation, you'd mentioned, that also then connects into payment for the services, because, whether we're talking value-based care or fee for service, where a lot of, the industry still lies, you're still looking at how do I get reimbursed for the care that I'm providing. So kind of how does that end up factoring into, how you're working with clinicians as they're utilizing the smart technology?
It's a really critical question, because to drive adoption, three things really need to be true. One, you need to demonstrate clinical value and the ability for us to help these providers detect these conditions earlier. And we've done that through our clinical validation studies. Then the workflow needs to be really seamless, such that the provider wants to use it, the patient wants it to be used on them. It doesn't take a ton of time, in a very limited primary care visit. And so that really speaks to sort of workflow and the huge focus of our product team. But the third is really the economics around it. And the stethoscope is not discretely reimbursed as a separate part of the physical exam. It's integrated in the exam today. And what's really important for us is to really tell the story and speak to the value of doing a more comprehensive AI-based cardiac disease detection screening, essentially, or examination using the stethoscope, but it really is incremental to the normal stethoscope exam. And so our team pursued a CPT code through the AMA, and were recently awarded a Category 3 CPT code. And that CPT code is tied not to the stethoscope, it's tied to the clinical decision support that our AI algorithms are providing around some of these conditions that we're helping to detect. And so it's incremental to the traditional stethoscope exam. And the hope is that that incremental reimbursement will help incentivize, rightly so, physicians who are very short on time to be able to glean that extra insight and hopefully find those patients sooner. Both important from a fee-for-service perspective, and then to your point on value-based, there's a little different incentive structure, really more around how do you prevent that downstream readmission if you can find those patients in a primary care setting.
Right. And you're definitely right. It's, there's two different economic motivations there, but both tie into, how do I maximize my value at the end of the day? But kind of more interestingly, like, what was that process like lobbying for and then obtaining a new CPT code? It's, I remember a long time ago dabbling with trying to help a client do it. And it was, you found it, I believe there was like experts focused on that field. So would love to be able to kind of learn from your experience.
Absolutely. It is a very different path than sort of what we had done to date around clinical validation, and also just even getting our products through the FDA. Pursuing this market access and reimbursement work inspired us, led us to bring on some folks that were experts in this space. And one of the really kind of important inputs to this was the clinical validation work that we had done on a couple of our algorithms with a couple key partners. So we talked a little bit about MassGen. We did a study with them on the structural heart side that showed that Eko's AI was able to help identify structural heart murmurs at twice the level of a primary care physician in a primary care setting, really more so at the level of a cardiologist. And similarly, on the low ejection fraction side, we did a study with the NHS in the UK to show really high performance and accuracy of detecting low ejection fraction when deploying we call it our low ejection fraction algorithm in the field with providers in the UK. And so those two pieces, the first, which was published in the American Heart Association journal, the second, which was published in the Lancet, really served as sort of the foundational clinical validation evidence that we needed to pursue a Category 3 CPT code. And so with the help of our consultants, we obviously met with the AMA, we filled out the application, but then we also worked with a couple of colleges and associations to get letters of support and to really be able to provide the physician an expert's view on why this early detection is so important, and of course the need to be able to be reimbursed for that work.
So, and then I think you said it was more on the kind of that clinical support side of the house. So, kind of where does that fit into the broader scheme of, CPT codes, and why did you focus in on that particular area?
The product is regulated as a clinical decision support versus a diagnostic. And there are, predicates from the AMA for reimbursing for clinical decision support algorithms. And so we were able to sort of plug into that existing model, but it is a different code and a different indication than a diagnostic code.
Yeah, no, and that certainly makes sense. It's, to the extent you don't have to kind of chart an entirely new course, makes it a little bit easier. So kind of once you have the code, what happens then? Because hopefully people recognize having the code in and of itself doesn't mean that it's actually going to be reimbursable yet, right?
Correct. Yeah, you have the code, and then you have to move towards coverage and reimbursement. And that's really around working with payers, private payers, ultimately, CMS, to really demonstrate the clinical value that this is going to provide. And in our healthcare system, there isn't blanket coverage. You have to work, certainly not across both private and public. And so our next step is working with payers on coverage policies, which is probably going to be a 1 to 2 year process.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of reemphasizes everything you've been saying, where it's always a very long-term game that you're looking at in order to drive progress and kind of drive the adoption around that. Yeah, so a lot of very good food for thought. But as I said, believe it or not, we are already out of time. So I want to thank my guest, Jason Bellet, for a great conversation today.
Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone listening. Keep the dialogue going and connect with me at #HCDEJURE. I'm Matt Fisher. Until next time.